On June 3rd, 2019, 17-year-old Anthony Templet shot and killed his 53-year-old father, Burt Templet, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He confessed his crime while on the phone with a 911 operator. Burt died a few days later after the shooting. Hey, welcome to True Crime Travel Map. This is a podcast about a map I've been putting together about a bunch of true crime locations. You can find that at truecrimetravelmap.com. That being said, let's just get into this week's episode. This week, we're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to go over the murder of Burt Templet.
And by the way, I realize that it's Templet, even though sometimes I say Templet, but it's spelled Templet. I don't know. Anthony and Burt Templet, I believe is the way to say it, even though it ain't spelled that way.
There's a really dark background to unwind, so let's start unwinding. Anthony was born on September 13, 2001 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Teresa Thompson and Burt Templet met at a restaurant in Texas, Ingleside, Texas, where Teresa was working at the time. They ended up relocating to Houston, Texas in the year 2000 for Burt's job. But when they got there, it wasn't really as great as it seemed. But mostly because of Burt. He had a really bad temper and he was using drugs at the time. The combination of this bad temper and the cocaine use led to physical abuse of Teresa, which landed him short stints in jail for these attacks. Teresa gave birth to Anthony Templet on September 13, 2001, but Burt wasn't any better of a person by that time. At one point, things got so bad that Teresa would actually leave notes around the house saying that if she got murdered or anybody found her dead, that it was Burt. Like, that's pretty wild. Like, if somebody knows for a fact, hey, if I die, it was this guy. So she hid these notes hoping that, I don't know if there was a murder and the police had to search the house looking for any kind of evidence, that they would stumble across these letters about her or notes saying that it was definitely Burt. So yeah, just not a good guy. She also reported that he hired a hitman to off her. And how does she know this? Because the hitman actually came to her house and told her, hey, Teresa, I was hired by your husband Burt, but I'm not going to do my job. I'm not sure if he was just not good at his job or he just felt bad, but that's wild. That's two things right there. Yeah, Burt's not a good guy. But one specifically horrific moment came when Burt actually struck her during an argument, and then Teresa left, obviously, which she should have left. And Burt's parents were actually there, and they ended up leaving too with Teresa. So, yeah, it's just not good all around. So when Teresa went to leave after being struck by Burt, she went to grab Anthony and leave, and Burt held on to him and would not let her take him. So, Teresa's boarded a bus and left the area without Anthony, which is pretty wild, but I get it. You know, you're an abusive thing, you need to get away. She did return for Anthony in 2007, but there was no one at the residence when she returned. And she also filed custody but for Anthony, and Burt never showed up at his court appearance, so in Baton Rouge, where he now lived. So Burt took Anthony to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, away from Teresa, away from everybody. So at that point, Burt was forced to give Anthony back to Teresa, and Teresa drove back to Texas with Anthony. Everything at that point appeared to be going well, but then Burt apparently hired private investigators to watch over Teresa in her house. He wanted to monitor every move of her and Anthony's. Then Burt went to court in Louisiana, and he actually managed to get temporary full custody of Anthony. I don't know how he managed to do that, but he did. Pretty not cool. Pretty wild. Teresa did not have the financial resources to continue a court battle to get Anthony back, so she actually lost him. So Burt and Anthony lived in Burt's house in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Burt had a pretty good job. He was a project control engineer, and he earned over $100 an hour, so he was doing well for himself, but it's not like he shared that or he treated Anthony well at all. Burt was definitely not a good father to Anthony. He was extremely controlling and demanding. He monitored all of Anthony's activities, and Anthony was not allowed to socialize at all. 0 friends, 0 friend group, none of that. Just solo, him and Burt. Burt even pretended to homeschool Anthony, but he didn't provide him anything of educational value. Anthony was isolated verbally and physically, and he was mistreated all the time, on a regular basis. He never received any medical care, so Burt was just kind of taking over this kid's life. The entire time, he lived with him one-on-one. He just controlled this kid and I don't know why he wanted to get custody if he wasn't going to treat this kid well. It's just, I don't know, doesn't make sense to me at all. So in 2008, a woman named Susan was introduced to Burt, and they became romantically involved. So Susan had a son as well, named Peyton. So Peyton, Burt, Susan, and Anthony lived in Burt's house. Susan and Peyton would later say that Burt was extremely abusive to all of them, and especially to Anthony. It was clear to everybody that Anthony felt scared around his father. He was always walking on eggshells, never knowing when his dad was going to fly off the wall. Anthony tried to survive, keeping to himself. He spent most of his time in his room. The level of control that Burt had in that house was just extraordinary. He had 8 cameras mounted around his property, and he would use an app to monitor the location of Anthony and his phone, as well as just to monitor all of the cameras. Burt wanted to know what everyone in his house was doing at all times. But at some point, Burt eventually wanted Anthony to get a job. So he contacted his friend who worked at a nursery and arranged Anthony to get an interview. But during the interview, he would not let Anthony answer any questions. So he was there with him during the interview, didn't let him say a word during the interview, answered the entire thing. But Anthony was still hired for the position. But the supervisor soon noticed that there was a couple of unusual things about Anthony and his dad, Burt. Burt actually completed the application for Anthony. Like, physically wrote it. Like, it was that controlling. And Anthony didn't know anything. Anthony was not connected or educated. Like he didn't even know his mother's name. He didn't appear to know any celebrities. Like, even the biggest celebrities out there, not even like, just any of them. He didn't know any of them. He was just disconnected to all society, all of pop culture, all of everything. Like, seriously. Like, he didn't know The Rock. Like, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Rocky Maivia. He didn't know The Rock. Anthony said he was being homeschooled, but he couldn't name any of the classes he was taking. And the supervisor noticed that Burt was actually tracking the location of Anthony's phone, and it was so intense that he actually called the workplace once when he noticed that Anthony hasn't moved in a while. But it was just because he was just sitting there working, doing his job, but he wasn't moving, so his phone wasn't moving. That's the level that this guy had of control. So Anthony remained in these horrible conditions for several years, and in 2019, Peyton was picked up by his father due to Burt being harmful. And the police visited Burt's house, and they had to ask Anthony if Burt was being physically abusive, and he responded no. And that was after one particularly vicious attack against Susan. So Susan moved to a hotel room and she filed a protective order against Burt. And after this, Burt's behavior became more increasingly paranoid and desperate. He also began acting really erratic. He started keeping a loaded handgun with him at all times. Police would try to serve him legal documents, but he would just not answer the door, completely ignore them. Anthony said that one time when the police were there at the front door, Burt was crouched down near the door holding a shotgun. Susan posted the protective order on the Nextdoor app, so all the neighbors were able to see the details. After this, Burt became even more paranoid. In addition, he lost his job and had $80,000 in credit card debt. Nothing was going his way, and he was suffering one defeat after another. Alright, so this brings us to the timeline of the crime, right? So this was June 3rd, 2019, around 3 a.m. 53-year-old Burt, 17-year-old Anthony. Let's get it on. Anthony and Burt were alone at Burt's house. Burt asked Anthony for his phone. And Anthony said, no, you can't have my phone. But Burt thought he was talking to Susan, who wasn't living with them anymore, because of the attack, Burt's attack on Susan. So Burt thought Anthony was communicating with Susan, so they got a big fight. So Anthony ran into Burt's bedroom and locked the door. Burt tried to force his way in by breaking the door. Anthony said he feared for his life and he retrieved 2 revolvers, alright, which Burt kept in a closet in his bedroom, which Anthony knew about. So then, after he got the revolvers, Anthony opened the bedroom door, pointed the revolvers at Burt, and fired. The bullet struck his father in the face. Burt retreated to the bathroom and pleaded with Anthony to stop. Anthony pursued him. He fired 2 more times, striking his father 1 more time. At 3:15 a.m., Anthony Templet called 911.
Your emergency.
I just killed my dad. What do I need to tell you?
So you said you just killed your dad?
Yeah.
Okay, and what's the address?
I think it's 17886 Great Moss Avenue.
17886 Green Moss
Avenue, I think.
Okay, and is he still alive or?
He might be, I don't know. I think I shot him like 3 times, I think.
You shot him 3
I'm not sure how
times?
many times I hit him. I know there's blood on the floor, so I know he's at least been shot once.
Okay.
I shot 3 times at him. He's on the ground.
Okay, you shot him 3 times with a gun?
Yes,
Okay.
100%. Or at least I tried to. He tried to attack me. We got into a fist fight, and I ran in his room and locked the door and grabbed the gun. And I unlocked the door, and he tried to and then I shot him.
Okay, and around what age is your father?
50 something.
Okay, 50.
Yeah, remember? Yes.
And are you there right now or have you left?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. You still at your dad's house?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and what's your name?
Anthony Joseph Templet. Templet.
P-U-M-P?
T-E-M, like a temple,
Okay.
but add a T at the end.
Okay. Okay, and do you know exactly where you shot him at? The areas?
Yeah.
Where?
Excuse me?
Where?
The address I just gave you, I guess.
No, the different areas of his body.
I aimed for the head, but I might have hit him in the chest. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Are the cops coming? Is someone?
Yes, I have an ambulance on the way.
Okay.
Okay, sir, but I am going to transfer you over to another department. They have some additional questions to ask you, okay?
Alright, are you certain that the cops are coming to the right address? Like, I'm not 100% if I give you the exact right address.
You're not sure if that's the right address?
That sounds right. That sounds right.
Okay, stay on the line, okay? I'm going to transfer you over.
Okay.
After entering the house, the police found a revolver in the kitchen, and the hammer was cocked. They found another revolver in the same condition on the bed. In the hallway, Burt Templet lay there, still breathing, and he was transported to a nearby hospital. Anthony agreed to talk to the police and explain to them all the issues between him and his father and all the abuse that he's been suffering, not just that night, but over the years. His father would call him names, become physically and verbally violent. Obviously, all this schooling or lack thereof is just negligence on a child. He said he felt like his life was in danger, so he shot Burt without giving him any warning, though. He said he just opened the door and fired immediately. Anthony acknowledged that there was a phone in the bedroom, but he did not trust the police for help. And he also acknowledged that he could have jumped out the window. There was a window in the room. He could have jumped out. It was on the first floor. It's not like he would have done any damage to himself. But he did not use that to exit the house. He did not call the police. Instead, he opened the door and shot his dad, Burt. Anthony was arrested and charged with attempted manslaughter. Burt, his father, actually died on June 6th, 3 days later. So therefore, Anthony's charges were then upgraded to manslaughter, right? Eventually, he was indicted on charges of second-degree murder. After an investigation into Anthony's background and all the circumstances surrounding the case, Anthony was offered a plea deal, and he would plead no contest to negligent homicide and receive 5 years of probation. He is required to seek counseling and obtain a high school diploma and either work full-time or be enrolled in a full-time school. And if he completes the requirements of this probation, he will be eligible to have his record expunged. So this shocking story made the headlines, obviously, across the United States. But in addition to giving his case a major dose of notoriety, it also brought to life the fact that there was a long-lost relative situation, this Natasha Thompson, Anthony's estranged sister, and she came forward and revealed that Anthony had been taken from the family in her home in Texas by Burt 11 years earlier. Before she spotted Anthony on the news, she had no idea if her brother was even alive. Anthony was just 5 years old when his dad snatched him away from his mother, and for Anthony, it was the beginning of over a decade of abuse. And then now Anthony's mother and Natasha just have this memory, losing a brother, losing a son, and now just fearing if Burt will come back. Natasha detailed the relationship between Burt and Teresa while highlighting just how difficult it would have been for Anthony after he was abducted. She said, "Burt and my mom were together for about 10 years and it was extremely violent. I can only imagine what Anthony's been through when he was a baby. Burt would hold him in his arms while abusing my mother, Natasha Thompson." There's also reports that Burt had been jailed for assaulting Teresa while she was pregnant with Anthony. It also came out that she would spend an entire week in bed after being abused by Burt. Burt's deeply disturbing behavior continued after Anthony was born. When Anthony was 7 months old, Burt kidnapped him and left Teresa no option but to call the police. Anthony was brought back home safe and no charges were filed against the abusive father. The harm that Burt was doing to his own family wouldn't stop until he abducted Anthony in 2007. After realizing that Anthony had been taken once again, Teresa filed a missing persons report for her son, and she filled her neighborhood with missing persons posters, but Burt was long gone. Burt took Anthony to Louisiana, and in order to keep Anthony's whereabouts a secret, Burt isolated the young boy from the outside world for the next 12 years. School was not an option, and Anthony rarely even was allowed to leave his bedroom. After Burt's death, some people in the neighborhood revealed that they had never actually seen Anthony in person, and they were only barely familiar with Burt. The 53-year-old Burt was apparently known for often appearing drunk. When questioned about the years that Anthony spent as a prisoner to his father, Anthony's sister did her best to fight for her brother in his corner. "He has been secluded and abused all these years by my own father. My brave brother had to defend himself for the last time against that evil man," said Natasha Thompson. The horrific truth about Burt was now out for the world to see. Anthony opened up about how his dad would punch him and kick him and throw him around the room, and the beatings would sometimes go on for hours. Burt had been physically abusive also to his ex-wife Susan. The violence against her was so deplorable that on one occasion, he actually knocked out some of her teeth. Susan actually filed a protection order just a few months before the shooting, leaving no question as to whether anyone in law enforcement was aware of Burt and his unforgivable actions. So on the fateful day that Anthony took his father's life, Burt suspected that his son had been in contact with Susan, who Anthony knew as his stepmother. This prompted the frightful father to search Anthony's phone for evidence of their conversations. So this is when the argument escalated into a physical altercation. This would be the final time that Burt would lay his abusive hands on his son, or anyone else for that matter. With Burt's death, the terrifying cycle of abuse was finally broken. Anthony may have escaped the prison of an abusive household, but he was locked behind bars. Prosecutors eventually confirmed that Anthony had been made to suffer years of abuse and was in fact acting in self-defense the night that he shot his father 3 times. The young man's charge was reduced to manslaughter 2 years after the death of his father, and Anthony pled no contest to negligible homicide. He was sentenced to 5 years of supervised probation with credit for time served. Anthony Templet now has a chance to complete his probation and get his GED. There was recently a Netflix documentary made about this in 2022. I highly recommend watching it. It's got, high budget Netflix, and it's a deep dive on of what happened. You can see some of the footage at the house. It's pretty wild. It's definitely worth watching. Okay, so if you want to go to the Templet residence where the shooting happened, the address is 17652 Gray Moss Avenue, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70817. Alright, so this is it. This is the house. As you can see, it's all one floor, so Anthony could have easily jumped out the window, but he decided instead to end his father's life. There's the house. Nice street, Gray Moss Avenue. You can see the bricks on the left. Front door. And that's the residence. That's the Templet house. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed the episode. If you guys have an address you guys want me to put on my map, message me at truecrimetravelmap@gmail.com. Check out the map at truecrimetravelmap.com. Alright, also I'm a stand-up comedian, so you guys want to see me, you guys want to see my new chicken joke, go to @Mike Mazzolotti on all platforms. You guys can check that out. I'd appreciate it. And if you guys want to follow me in real life, go to the Find My app and request my location. Thank you guys so much again for watching, and as always, Godspeed, Dark Travelers.